Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of 0x DevTalks. So the last episode, we discussed the beta release of TX Relay API, which enables developers to build both gasless approvals and gasless swaps into their applications and workflows. And as teams have started building with TX Relay, we've received some great questions. So in this episode, I'll be covering the top 10 TX Relay FAQs, plus a bonus one, because I couldn't decide on just 10. Notably covering common errors, how does TX Relay compare to Account Abstraction, supported tokens, and many other questions. So if this is your first time watching, 0x DevTalks is a series that covers implementation best practices when building with 0x APIs, as well as taking you behind the scenes for discussions with our engineers and product teams. And I'm your host, Jessica, developer advocate at 0x. All right, so the first question we have is, why is it called TX Relay? Well, the first portion, TX, is short for transaction, and the relay portion refers to the fact that in order to provide these gasless flows, TX Relay leverages the 0x relay network in order to relay the transaction on behalf of the user. And so this is why we have to use the submit endpoint. So rather than us posting the transaction directly to the network, we're allowing TX Relay to post it on behalf of us and take care of that gas fee. All right, second question is, what chains is TX Relay deployed on? Well, through 2023, the end of this year, TX Relay is deployed on Ethereum Mainnet and Polygon, with more chains to come. All right, question number 3 is, what tokens are supported by TX Relay? Well, TX Relay offers gasless approvals and gasless swaps for different sets of supported tokens. So on the gasless approvals part, you can find a list of all the tokens that support gas approvals in this list in the documentation. And as a reminder, these are tokens that support EIP 2612. So in other words, these are ERC20 tokens with the permit function. And another way, rather than just looking at this list, is that you can check whether or not a token supports gasless approvals at the time of trading. And you can do so by checking a response that we're given back from the quote endpoint. So the response back will have a variable called is gasless approval. And if this variable is true, then this token that the user is selling does support gasless approvals. Now for the gasless swaps portion, we have different sell token lists. So on Ethereum Mainnet, TX Relay supports only selling ERC20 tokens that are on this Uniswap token list. So to phrase it another way, you could buy any token on Ethereum, provided that the sell token is on this Uniswap token list. And for Polygon, TX Relay supports selling all tokens that Swap API supports on Polygon. All right, question number 4. So who is paying these gas fees for these swaps to happen? Well, as you suspect, there is no free lunch, and gas fees are actually getting paid by 0x. And that gas fee is covered by the cost that's going to be included to the user by default. So in other words, so while the gas is technically being paid by 0x, the user will cover the cost in terms of fees. So another implementation of this is if you are building an application, you may choose to sponsor the transactions, in which case you would be able to work directly with 0x to cover these costs, and your users would not be billed on chain. So question number 5 is, why is gasless swap support limited to a certain subset of tokens? Recall that on Mainnet, gasless swaps is supported for tokens that are on Uniswap's token list. However, for Polygon, TX Relay supports selling all tokens that Swap API supports on Polygon. And this is because 0x is covering the gas costs via the sell side token. So we're taking exposure on the price movements of this sell token. So on Mainnet, when the gas is high, that risk can be quite sizable. And on highly volatile tokens, such as long tail tokens, this risk again is quite large. However, on Polygon, that gas cost is much less compared to Mainnet, and thus we're able to support more tokens on Polygon. Question number 6 is, what if my user wants to sell a native token? So for example, selling ETH on Mainnet or Matic on Polygon. Well, in this case, we would recommend just using the plain old swap API. So in this case, the user is going to pay gas the standard way, meaning they'll need to pay with ETH on Mainnet or pay with Matic on Polygon. Alternatively, you could recommend your users to wrap their assets. So wrapping ETH to WETH or wrapping Matic to wrap Matic. Thereby you can use the TX Relay API. Okay, so the next question is, my user is doing a swap and needs an approval. Are these two separate transactions? And do I need two signatures? So even though gasless approvals and gasless swaps are going to be bundled together in the same transaction, they're going to each require a signature for their corresponding EIP 712 object. So that's the approval object for the gasless approvals and the trade object for the gasless swap. However, in the user experience in the front end part, you can design it where it looks like the user is just signing one transaction. If you check out the demo app, I've separated it out into two buttons for two signatures, but you can always consolidate it into one button that signs both objects. All right, the next question is, what does the gasless approval and gasless swap happy path look like? So I'd recommend checking out these two flowcharts that are linked in the documentation under the Understanding TX Relay section. So this one here shows the path for implementing the gasless approvals and gasless swaps. And this next one here implements gasless approvals, gasless swaps, as well as shows how to handle native tokens using Swap API. All right, so the next question is, what is the minimum amount that users can trade with TX Relay API? So the minimum is going to vary across chains, trade sizes, and the current gas condition. If your user is attempting to trade an amount that is too small at the moment, the API will respond with an error message that estimates the minimum amount required for trade. In general, we're going to recommend setting a minimum of $10 on Mainnet and $1 on other chains for the best experience. All right, so the next question is, how does TX Relay compare to swaps with account abstraction? That's a good question. So account abstraction allows for sponsored transactions as well. You can think of it as a more generalized form of TX Relay, where we can sponsor any transaction. However, the reason that TX Relay was built now is because AA technology is still quite nascent. And on top of that, in order for people to use it, users must have smart contract wallets. This means if you have an application already, all your users would need to migrate from their EOA wallets to smart contract wallets. And honestly, there's very few people today that are using AA wallets other than perhaps Gnosis wallet users. So TX Relay was built as a way to experience what account abstraction will provide, but give that experience today. So as AA account abstraction matures, TX Relay, we envision maturing alongside of it and expanding in capabilities. In other words, we see TX Relay as a bridge to that account abstraction future. In other words, you can think of TX Relay as a bridge to that account abstraction future. And as promised, here's a set of bonus questions. Here are two error messages. So the first one is, help, I received a no liquidity error. Now this error is typically triggered when there is no good market for the token pair selected. In this case, I'd recommend setting up some good error handling and displaying the proper message to your end user. The next error message here is, help, I received a token X is currently unsupported error. Well, this one is triggered when the token selected does not support gasless swaps. But we're still trying to go through the gasless swap route. Recall that we support gasless swaps for cell tokens that are on the following lists. So on ETH Mainnet, we only support tokens that are on the Uniswap token list, and for Polygon, we support all tokens that Swap API supports on Polygon. And with that, we wrap it up for the top 10 questions. So check out the TX Relay FAQ in the documentation that's linked down below to read these and other questions in more detail. Also sign up for beta access to TX Relay directly from your 0x dashboard. And as you're building, check out the demo app plus video walkthrough, which I'll link up above, to understand how to implement TX Relay. And as always, appreciate a like and subscribe on this video to stay up to date when content like this comes out. And if you have suggestions for topics, please drop them down in the comments below. Thanks for watching and happy swapping.